The first thing she noticed was not the barbed wire or the sentries perched high in their wooden towers, rifles angled downward like reminders carved in steel. It was the smell. Bacon, sweet smoke curling through the morning air, mingled with the bitter perfume of coffee. For Clara Weiss, 27 years old, and wearing the gray uniform of a defeated Reich, that smell was almost an insult. How could captivity smell better than freedom? She had marched through bombed-out streets in Berlin where air reeked of dust and fear. But here in Virginia, behind American fences, the air carried the fragrance of a breakfast she had never tasted so richly in her life. She was not a soldier with a rifle, but she was a soldier all the same. A Helferin of the Luftwaffe, trained to monitor signals, to catch the whispers of war as they crackled through the ether. Her skill had been her pride, her way of proving that she mattered in a nation where women were often dismissed as ornaments. Yet pride was a fragile thing, and surrender had stripped hers down to threads. In the camp she learned quickly that captivity was not starvation nor cruelty. It was abundance, almost indecent in its generosity. Every day she ate more meat than her mother could dream of finding in the markets of ruined Germany. She was offered chocolate bars, each wrapped in silver like a promise, and she wondered if her little sister back home even remembered what sugar tasted like. Sometimes she laughed at the absurdity, muttering in German that her captors were fattening her as their final sabotage. But abundance came with a price. Freedom within fences was its own illusion. The Americans smiled, but they were not blind. They knew her file. They knew she could break ciphers, identify call signs, expose networks invisible to the untrained eye. And so, one evening in May 1945, she was escorted to an office set apart from the barracks, its windows glowing like a lantern against the dark. That was when she met Colonel James Harlan. He was tall, his uniform crisp, his Kentucky accent rich and slow, as though every word had been distilled in oak barrels. His eyes carried authority, but also a softness that disarmed her more effectively than a gun. He greeted her not like a prisoner, but like a colleague. She did not trust it, not at first. But trust, like hunger, has a way of bending under pressure. Their first meeting was business. He asked about intercepted codes, about abbreviations that tangled his translators. She answered with precision, explaining the logic of her former superiors, the patterns hidden in repetition. He listened carefully, nodding as though each word mattered more than the last. When she finished, he surprised her with a smile. "You make it sound like music," he said, "though I admit I can't carry the tune." That moment unsettled her more than interrogation. He was supposed to strip her secrets, not joke about melodies. She felt both wary and strangely alive. In the weeks that followed, he summoned her again and again. Sometimes for documents, sometimes for long conversations that drifted far from the war. They spoke of poetry, of landscapes, of the possibility of peace in a world carved open by fire. Once, when she teased that he asked more about her thoughts than her codes, he leaned closer and said, "Maybe your thoughts are the code I really need to understand." Something shifted inside her. She had been raised to think of enemies as faceless. Yet here was a man who looked at her not as a German, not as a prisoner, but as Clara. That recognition was more dangerous than barbed wire. Still, she resisted the idea of allegiance. Her family was starving in Berlin, her brother possibly dead in the East. She carried guilt like a shadow stitched to her uniform. To work for the Americans felt like betrayal. Yet to refuse meant returning to a silence in which her voice no longer mattered. Between betrayal and erasure, which was truly worse? One night she was given a folder. Inside, a list of names, German scientists, whispered addresses, the faint outlines of a network preparing escape routes across oceans. The colonel tapped the paper gently. "You know these codes," he said. "You can help us stop what's left of the war before it poisons the peace." His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed something more, an appeal not to duty but to her. She stared at the folder, at the ink that seemed to throb on the page like veins carrying the remnants of a dying Reich. She wanted to look away, yet could not. Here was the choice that would redefine her: remain only a prisoner of war, or step into a mission that blurred captivity with freedom. Later she would confess, if only to herself, that the weight pressing her hand toward the folder was not loyalty to America, nor hatred of Germany. It was the gaze of the colonel, steady, patient, quietly insistent. In that gaze she felt seen, not as an enemy, not as a tool, but as a woman whose life could still mean something. She took the folder. The door closed behind her, and the night air felt different. The smell of bacon was gone, replaced by the faint tang of ink and paper. Somewhere beyond the fence, the world waited to rebuild itself. But within the camp, a secret war had just begun, one where Clara Weiss would discover that the heart could be compelled as surely as any code. The mission began in shadows, though no cloak or dagger was ever placed in her hands. Instead, Clara Weiss was armed with pencils, carbon paper, and the instinctive ear of a woman who had once bent her life to the rhythms of German signals. Night after night she sat across from Colonel James Harlan, the desk between them crowded with intercepted messages. Each scratch of her pen unraveled a knot his cryptographers could not loosen. She decoded patterns as if tracing the hidden pulse of the war still twitching beneath its corpse. The colonel called it work. To Clara, it felt like trespassing into a future she had not chosen. Her efficiency startled him. A single evening with her yielded what weeks of effort from his men could not. "You turned static into speech," he once told her, his words carrying admiration wrapped in the kind of warmth that unsettled her guard. He saw her not as a prisoner grudgingly useful, but as a mind of equal weight. That recognition was more intoxicating than the cigarettes he occasionally slid across the table, more dangerous than any secret scrawled in the files. Yet abundance breeds suspicion. Other prisoners noticed the rhythm of her summons, the late hours she returned from the office, the faint lift in her step that betrayed the comfort she tried to hide. Some called her a collaborator, others whispered that she had seduced the colonel. To them, she was a traitor wrapped in privilege. To herself, she was something far more confusing, a woman caught between betrayal and belonging. The colonel made matters worse, or perhaps better, with his quiet gestures. Notes tucked between documents, half confession, half riddle. One read, "Perhaps wars are not ended with treaties but with conversations such as these." Another simply admitted, "When you leave the room, it feels emptier than when you entered it." Clara did not know whether to laugh or weep at such tenderness. She had never been courted with words so gentle, not even in the years before war turned her life into uniform and duty. And still, guilt pressed against her ribs. Letters from Berlin spoke of hunger so fierce it bent women into bargaining their dignity for bread. Her mother stood in ration lines for hours, her sister's cheeks hollowing into shadows of childhood. Clara would reread those words by the light of her Baroque lamp, then step into an office where she was offered coffee and the regard of a man who treated her as indispensable. Every kindness from him became an unspoken accusation against herself. Yet she kept working. She traced networks of Nazi loyalists, men plotting escape routes to Spain and South America. Her corrections saved the Americans months of chasing ghosts. She identified forged codes, exposing safe houses before they could be activated. She told herself this was survival, nothing more. But in the quiet moments, when his hand lingered too long on a page she had marked, she felt the line blur. Was she serving her captors or answering something deeper inside her, something dangerously close to desire? Her wit sharpened in self-defense. Once, when asked why she worked so diligently, she answered with a smirk. Only in America could captivity come with promotion. He chuckled, though they both knew the humor carried a jagged edge. By 1946, the war had ended, yet the world grew no less perilous. The Americans spoke of Soviets with the same urgency once reserved for Nazis. German scientists became prizes in a new contest, their knowledge the currency of the future. Clara's skills had not diminished with peace, they had multiplied in value. For her, there would be no easy release. She was too useful to let go, too tangled in secrets to be free. The colonel fought for her, argued she should be allowed to stay in America under official protection. Whispers of marriage surfaced, though he voiced them in fragments, as if afraid the bureaucracy would strangle the thought before it reached daylight. She did not reject the idea, but nor did she embrace it. Love, she suspected, had become indistinguishable from survival. Was she choosing him, or simply choosing the only path that offered her a life beyond the barbed wire? Still, she stepped further into the shadows with him. Each name she exposed, each cipher she unraveled, bound her closer. The fence that once confined her became the border of a secret world in which she and the colonel shared both trust and guilt. She sometimes dreamed of Germany, but each morning she woke to America's abundance and his steady presence, and the choice remade itself. The climax came quietly, not with gunfire but with ink. One night, after hours of translating, he placed before her a document thicker than any she had seen. It carried orders, signatures, a plan to spirit entire teams of scientists across oceans. He looked at her and said, "If you take this on, there is no going back, not for you, not for me." She studied the pages, the words swimming like dark rivers. In them she saw betrayal of her homeland, betrayal of the prisoners who spat at her, betrayal even of herself. Yet she also saw something else, a future where she was not erased, where her name mattered, where she was more than a number in the ruins of Berlin. She lifted her pen. At that moment she understood the cruel symmetry of her life. She had once listened for signals to defend Germany. Now she listened to signals to dismantle what remained of it. The line between love and loyalty, between survival and treachery, had vanished entirely. When she set her pen down, the room felt heavier, as though history itself had leaned in to watch. The colonel reached for the file, his hand brushing hers, steady and unflinching. Outside, the night air was sharp, the camp silent. Somewhere beyond the fence, the world was reordering itself, nations shifting like tectonic plates. But within those walls, Clara Weiss had crossed an invisible boundary from which there was no return. She was no longer a prisoner. She was a weapon, sharpened by guilt, wielded by love, and set loose in the shadow war that had only just begun.